The ocean keeps its secrets in the dark, beneath the glittering surface, where sunlight dies and pressure becomes a living thing. Men and machines move like ghosts. When World War II began, the war on land drew headlines, battles, blitzkriegs, and marches that reshaped borders. But beneath the waves, a quieter and deadlier conflict had already begun. A war of steel and silence that would decide whether convoys lived or sank, whether entire nations starved or survived. Imagine the North Atlantic. In the winter of 1939, a single convoy, a slow, lumbering line of merchant ships, cuts through gray seas, steam stacking into the cold air. On deck, stokers feed the boilers, sailors check ropes, women and children huddle below. Food, fuel, weapons, everything a nation needs to fight, moves like blood across the ocean. And far below, waiting in the cold, are submerged hunters, U-boats, compact, lethal, and engineered for a single purpose, to turn the sea into a graveyard. The German U-boat was not the first submarine in history, but by 1939 it had become a perfected instrument of maritime terror. Sleek hulls, torpedoes with deadly accuracy, crews hardened by months at sea. They prowled the shipping lanes and struck without warning. In the early months of the war, the Allies had no answer. Radar was crude, convoys were scattered, and doctrine had not yet adapted to a weapon that could kill without exposing itself. When the first freighters began to vanish, a distress signal here, a flare there, panic moved like a ripple through port cities. Shipping companies rerouted, captains altered courses, but the sea was vast and the hunters small. Each sinking had a cost beyond the ship. Families lost wages, armies lost supplies, and the fragile chain of wartime logistics frayed by a dozen silent strikes. But this was not merely a tactical problem. It was a strategic crisis. Britain, an island nation, depended on imports, food and fuel that would not be produced at home. If the U-boats could sever those lifelines, an entire nation might be forced to capitulate without a single enemy soldier setting foot on its soil. So the admiralties responded, clumsily at first, with outdated doctrine and brave men learning in real time. Convoys were organized, escorts assigned, mines were laid, merchant ships were fitted with armaments and metal skins. Radios jumped with coded warnings and frantic pleas. The war below the waterline forced an evolution in thinking. Anti-submarine warfare was no longer a peripheral task. It became central. And yet, for every tactic the Allies devised, the U-boat commanders adapted. They changed hunting patterns, worked at night, used weather as cover, and perfected a terrifying art, the wolf pack. In the wolf pack, groups of submarines hunted together, coordinated, patient, waiting until a lone ship or a small convoy stumbled into their net. Then, as if a signal pierced the stillness, the pack would attack. By 1941, the Atlantic was no longer an open sea. It had become a battlefield of ghosts. Ships still sailed, but every voyage was a gamble. For the German Kriegsmarine, the U-boat was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of precision, fear, and pride. The Reich's propaganda machine painted submarine commanders as sea warriors, modern knights of the deep, and perhaps, in a dark way, they were. Each submarine, compact and suffocating, carried 40 to 50 men into the blackness. These weren't just sailors, they were hunters trained to disappear. When they left the port, waving goodbye to the families who lined the docks, they knew that nearly 1 in every 2 would never return. Still, they went, quietly, bravely, and often with a strange sort of faith. The man who shaped this hidden war was Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet. Dönitz believed that Germany could starve Britain into submission not with bombs, but with hunger. His strategy was simple: sink everything that moved, and do it faster than the Allies could replace it. But his genius lay in the method, the wolf pack. Instead of sending U-boats alone, Dönitz organized them in coordinated hunting groups. At night, under radio silence, they would wait, spread across hundreds of miles of sea. When one submarine sighted a convoy, it would shadow it silently, reporting the position back to headquarters. Within hours, other U-boats would close in. Then, in a burst of chaos, they struck all at once, torpedoes flashing in every direction, merchant ships burning, men screaming into the Black Sea. In those moments, there was no escape. The Allied escorts were too few, their technology too crude. Every night, explosions lit the Atlantic like lightning, and by dawn, another dozen ships were gone. Entire convoys vanished, leaving only oil slicks and floating debris. The Allies called it the Black Gap, a deadly stretch of mid-Atlantic, where air cover couldn't reach and sonar signals faded. In that no-man's land of water, the wolf packs ruled. For the men inside the submarines, each success was followed by silence. They listened as their victims screamed for help, and then, when depth charges began to fall, they shut down the engines and held their breath. The steel hull groaned under pressure. The lights flickered. Somewhere above, destroyers hunted them, dropping explosives in patterns meant to crush them into the seabed. Inside the submarine, the air grew thick. Condensation dripped from the ceiling. Every man stared at the pressure gauge. They knew that one mistake, one leak, one fire, one wrong movement could turn the boat into a tomb. But the hunters rarely pitied the hunted. They believed they were serving destiny, that every ship they sank weakened an enemy trying to destroy their homeland. Dönitz called them the salt of the sea. The Reich awarded medals, printed stories, and showed smiling faces of captains who returned from patrols, those who didn't return. By the spring of 1943, the ocean had become a graveyard of steel and silence. Thousands of sailors, German, British, American, had vanished beneath the waves. The war in the Atlantic was no longer just a battle of torpedoes and ships. It had become a war of intelligence. Deep in the English countryside, at a quiet estate called Bletchley Park, a small group of men and women worked tirelessly behind locked doors. They weren't soldiers. They didn't carry rifles or wear medals, but their work would decide the fate of nations. These were the code breakers, mathematicians, linguists, and scientists, led by one man who rarely smiled, Alan Turing. Turing believed that the human mind could be replicated in a machine, a concept the world had never truly understood. And so, while bombs fell over London, Turing and his team built a mechanical brain, a device designed to crack the German Enigma code, the cipher that guided every U-boat movement, every convoy attack, every secret order. Each Enigma message used billions of possible letter combinations. The code changed daily. To most, it was unbreakable. But at Bletchley, obsession replaced fear. The clatter of Turing's machine, the bomb, echoed through the night as reels spun and wires sparked. Every new code broken meant hundreds of lives saved. Then one cold morning, a message decoded by Bletchley revealed something extraordinary. A U-boat formation preparing to strike a massive Allied convoy in the mid-Atlantic. For the first time, the hunters were known. The Royal Navy redirected destroyers and aircraft, setting a trap of their own. When the U-boat surfaced at dusk to attack, the sky exploded with flares. Depth charges rained down. Sonar pings filled the water. One after another, the submarines were torn apart. That night, the ocean belonged to no one, only to the dead. But in that chaos, something had changed forever. For the first time, the Allies could predict. They were no longer blind. With the help of code-breaking, radar, and the newly developed Lee light, a blinding spotlight mounted under aircraft, Allied planes began hunting U-boats even at night. Submarines that once ruled the waves suddenly found themselves exposed, vulnerable, and hunted. German crews, once confident, now whispered about the invisible eyes above them, planes appearing out of nowhere, destroyers arriving hours after they surfaced. Admiral Dönitz, once hailed as the architect of victory, grew desperate. He changed Enigma settings, demanded new tactics, even built snorkels to allow submarines to stay submerged longer. But it was too late. Every patrol became a death sentence. By mid-1943, the loss rate of U-boats had doubled, then tripled. Young recruits, barely trained, were being sent to sea knowing they had little chance of coming back. The average lifespan of a U-boat sailor had dropped to just 6 weeks. Still, they sailed. Still, they fought. And still, beneath the waves, when the echoes of battle faded across the Atlantic, what remained was silence. The kind of silence that only the dead could keep. The sea, once a roaring battlefield, now carried ghosts beneath its surface. Hundreds of ships, thousands of men, and decades of memories lay buried in the deep. For the Allied nations, victory in the Atlantic came at a staggering price. More than 36,000 sailors were lost. The Germans, too, paid heavily. Over 30,000 U-boat crewmen vanished, most without a trace. Each submarine was a coffin of steel, sealed by the crushing weight of the ocean. But for the survivors, the few who returned, life would never be the same again. Many could not sleep without hearing the hum of sonar or the muffled thud of depth charges in their dreams. Some refused to sail again, while others could not bear to live on land. The ocean had taken something from all of them, not just their comrades, but a part of their souls. In post-war Germany, the harbors that once buzzed with the pride of the U-boat fleet now stood empty. The flags were gone, the crews scattered, and the dreams of naval supremacy lay in ruins. Admiral Dönitz, who had once commanded with unshakable confidence, now sat in a courtroom, not at a command table. He defended his sailors' honor, but history had already written its verdict. Yet even as the war's dust settled, the lessons learned beneath the waves began shaping a new world. Engineers and scientists, who once built machines of war, turned their skills toward innovation, toward understanding how man and machine could coexist in the future. Sonar evolved into tools for ocean exploration. Submarine designs inspired deep-sea research vessels. The horrors of war had accidentally opened doors to discovery. But not all lessons were technological. In the quiet villages of Britain and Germany, widows waited by the shore for men who would never return. Mothers clutched letters stained by salt and time. Children grew up hearing only stories, not voices. The war had ended, but its silence was deafening. Decades later, divers would descend into the cold black waters of the Atlantic, tracing the outlines of forgotten ships. They found plates still set on tables, boots lying neatly by bunks, and in one rusted control room, a journal, pages still legible, where a sailor had written his final words. "If this is to be my end, let it be quick. The sea takes us all, friend and foe alike." That discovery became a haunting reminder that in war, there are no true victors beneath the waves, only men who did what they believed was right, until the sea decided otherwise. As the Cold War began, the ocean once again became a stage not for open battle, but for shadow warfare. Submarines evolved from diesel-powered hunters to silent nuclear giants capable of ending civilization with a single command. The very technology that began with enigma, codes, and periscopes now held the power of annihilation. Time, like the tide, buries everything, but not forever. The ocean, vast and unyielding, became both a grave and a guardian of truth. For decades, the Battle of the Atlantic lay silent beneath miles of dark water, its stories forgotten, its heroes unnamed. But history has a way of resurfacing. In recent years, explorers, divers, and historians have returned to the depths, armed with technology far beyond what the soldiers of 1942 could imagine. Sonar mapping, remote-operated submarines, and underwater drones now scan the seabed, revealing what the war left behind: a metallic graveyard frozen in time. Each wreck tells a story: a merchant ship torn apart mid-voyage, a U-boat resting quietly, its hull scarred by depth charges. And sometimes, you'll find a simple object, a compass, a rusted helmet, a photograph still sealed in a watertight case. That reminds us these were not just soldiers, but sons, fathers, and friends. For the men who never returned, these relics are their only voice. Every rivet, every shattered hull plate, is a whisper from the past. Remember us, not for how we died, but for what we endured. In coastal museums across the world, from Liverpool to Hamburg, from Halifax to Normandy, curators now preserve these fragments of the sea. Children press their faces to the glass, staring at the very tools of survival used 8 decades ago. To them, it's history. To those who lived it, it was life or death. But the legacy of the Battle of the Atlantic isn't just about loss. It's about transformation. The same seas once filled with fire now carry trade, travel, and peace. Where destroyers once hunted submarines, now fishing boats glide quietly at sunrise. And where men once fought to control the ocean, humanity now works together to understand it. The lessons of that war, courage, sacrifice, innovation, became the foundation for modern naval science and communication. The radar systems once used to find enemies are now used to save lives at sea. Encrypted wartime messages evolved into the secure technologies that power our digital world today. Even the smallest details, the way sonar pulses echo across water, have led to breakthroughs in underwater research, marine conservation, and deep-sea exploration. In a strange way, the war's darkness gave birth to light. As we look back, we realize something powerful: history doesn't just belong to the past. It lives in us, through every lesson learned, every story retold, every name remembered. The men who sailed into the Atlantic's black waters knew they might never return. Yet they went, not for glory, not for recognition, but because they believed their sacrifice would protect something greater. And it did. Their courage shaped the modern world. Even now, when the ocean swells at dusk and the horizon burns red, one might imagine the faint outlines of those lost ships rising through the mist. A fleeting reminder that some stories never truly end.